Glad to see you were all arriving. I'm going to sound 3 bells and take a number of breaths before we begin to make sure everyone has time to arrive. Welcome everyone to our morning's talk. I'm very excited to see what unfolds. Lindsay Bear, Cherokee and Danish descent, took the 5 precepts, or we call the mindfulness trainings now, in 1998 while living in Plum Village. She is currently raising a daughter in Northern California with her husband in their mixed Native and Buddhist traditions. For the past 2 decades, she has worked in publishing and philanthropy, supporting ecological justice and the cultural revival of indigenous peoples. I was a roommate for those 3 months while Lindsay was in Plum Village. And then we lost contact for some 22 years. And were reunited by a mutual friend about 6 months ago. And to my delight, I've struck up a very engaging and stimulating conversation between us. So, thank you so much, Lindsay, for coming. Sherrie Smith-Ferri, PhD, is a member of the Northern California Dry Creek Rancheria Band of Pomo Indians, and also descended from Bodega Bay Miwok people. She recently retired from a 25-year career working at the Grace Hudson Museum as the director and specializing in studying Pomo weavers and their basketry. I've also had the great joy in many different ways to benefit from Sherrie. Sherrie is a resident of Ukiah. Her parting gift to our community was to create a wild garden on the grounds of our museum, which is, I don't know, it seems to me very unique and alive with indigenous wisdom. Sherrie also spends some time on the Mariposa land gathering and enjoying the nature we have here and encouraging us to find our way as stewards of the land in a very wholesome way. So when I was talking to Lindsay about making this presentation and I mentioned the inspiration that I've been receiving from Sherrie, Lindsay's face lit up and said, "Oh, Sherrie, oh, I love Sherrie." I said, "Hey, how about making this into a conversation between you?" So what's going to unfold, I have no idea, but I have every confidence that I'm already psyched for it and feel so grateful to be gifted this opportunity for all of us. So without further ado, make sure all of us who are not speaking are muted, and take it away, Sherrie and Lindsay.
Thank you all for having us here in your homes and in your retreat. That's a very special time. It's a real honor to get to be with you all in that. Um, and Sherrie, it's so good to see your face. Um, it's not something that we get to do as much this year that we've done in the past, and um, it's so nourishing. We get to see one another. Um, Sherrie was telling me, Sherrie and I have known each other for years.
Yes.
Find a
They
number
start to add up. Yes.
and every time I get to talk with Sherrie, it just feels like the rain. I'm in Northern California today, and it's raining really lately, and you can just watch everything soaking it up. And that's what it feels like every time I get to talk with Sherrie. So while this is an honor to get to talk with you all, it really is just an excuse to hang out with Sherrie.
And I feel the same way about you, Lindsay. So
It's such a delight. We were talking earlier this week. We know that you have been thinking about time, the past, the present, and the future, and have been sort of sitting deeply with that. Um, and and today, Joanne said that you're sitting with the future, and what that is. And Sherrie and I were talking earlier this week about it, and she told me about what her plans were for later today and this weekend. And maybe I can let you share that, Sherrie, and we can talk about why that feels like such a meditation on the future.
yes, thanks, Lindsay. I'm going to go be gathering basket willow. And really actually doing less gathering and more really pruning, so that you have to, it's part of the process. And it's a process where you're always sort of building toward the future now. I would say, so my particular area of study over the years has been pomo baskets. And for those of you that don't know, kind of this part of Northern California, it's the homeland of Pomo Indian people, who are probably in some ways best known for their basketry around the world. It is truly world famous. And I first knew baskets, learned about baskets when I was growing up, because they were in our house and they were part of life. And they were members of the family, actually, because usually there's always stories associated with baskets and who made them. And one of the things I learned is it's not easy to answer the question that I get asked most often in kind of my professional role, which is, how long does it take to make a basket? And it's interesting. It goes right back to time again. And how do you think about it and parse it, and what is it? So the thing about that question is there's so many ways to answer it. And people don't really know what the question is that they're asking. They think that a basket starts, they actually are asking the question, how long does it take to weave a basket, which is something totally different. Because by the time you're actually sitting down and doing the weaving, I could see you nodding your head, Lindsay, you know, this time you're sitting down weaving, you're essentially at the end of the whole process, which has taken years of working with, so the materials, gathering the materials, preparing the materials, all of that is the part of it that takes way longer than actually weaving the basket, because you're working with this contradiction. You're working with native materials, so natural plants that are indigenous to the area, natural materials, but they're not So you can't go out to the store and buy those materials and then just sit down to weave. But the contradiction is you also just can't go out in nature and find those materials, because sort of natural growth processes don't result in the kind of growth that you need for making a basket. You need materials that are fine, you need materials that are long and straight and strong. So you have to actually work with your plants for a number of years to get them to produce that kind of material. So you're really, and that's actually what we're going to do when I'm talking about picking the willow and going to get willow tomorrow. We're going to a place where they've just done some stream restoration work about 2 years ago and planted gray willow, which is what we'll use. But you need to sort of start to be able to cut that willow back and get it to kind of sprout from its base again and give you these nice long straight shoots. And ideally you're going to cut them back for several years to get them to produce this growth. So that's the process that you start and that you're engaged in. It's a relationship that you end up being engaged in with those particular plants and that particular piece of land. And that's where you start with making a basket. And how you encapsulate all of that, I don't know. And we could talk about that for a while. But anyway, that's more than you want to know probably. But there you go.
From the future, you know, I'm a mom, and I'm a mom of a 3-year-old, and I became a mom later in life, and so my understanding and thinking about the future changed when I was a mom. It just sort of naturally took a different shape, and when I became a mom, and I think I had known it intellectually, but I don't think I felt it in the same way. The responsibility to generations and generations and generations, right? Like we get taught in our family that you think, you know, generations out. Some people go 7, you know, but it's you're not thinking. Your stories don't happen in short time, right? Like 500 years is nothing, right? You're talking about stories that have come from tens or hundreds of thousands of years and are looking that far in the future. And so that's your place on the stream, is some tiny point in something that's, you know, much longer than your lifetime. But I'm not sure I felt it in my bones until I became a mother. And then something for me, you know, I think this happens differently for different people. Something clicked differently, and I could feel the ripples of my actions out into the future. And I could also, I think because I knew that the future was also unknowable to me. It wasn't something that I could predict or envision or control. And for whatever reason, the thing that came to my mind was talking with a friend, Tima Link, who's also a Chumash basket weaver, and her going out pruning and saying, and I was saying, like, how do you not be scared, right? Like, I have this tiny little precious life, and I have no idea what's going to happen, and the world is always full of uncertainty, and the future is not something I engaged with this thoroughly, and here it is, and she was like, it's a little like pruning willow. Get to a basket. Off, and I'm gathering and think, I wonder if I'll ever live to see this. I know that if I do it, I'm doing the thing that I need to be doing, and I'm helping the willow, and someone will use it. And even if they don't, here I am, and I'm getting to have the relationship that I'm supposed to have with the land that I'm supposed to be on. And
you're actually so one of the acts of pruning the willow is it's good for us, humans, basket makers. We're getting, plant material that we can use. But what we're doing, though it looks destructive, is really good for the willow. So willow gets infested with these kind of waspy things that lay their eggs and inside the willow, and they swell up and it chews its way out and starts to infest the plant, and it becomes really unhealthy and weak. And pruning the basket, every couple of years, the way you do, it doesn't give that bug a chance to actually find a home. You don't give it enough time. So willow that's been pruned is much healthier and vigorous. So it's not only for you, and that's one of kind of the things in terms of building for the future, and a future that includes human presence on the earth. I think one of the older lessons that we need to bring forward to the future is that there's a relationship that's a healthy one that people can have with the land around them, where it's good for humans. We depend on the earth, but it's also, it can make the world, the natural world, much healthier. And I think that's a lesson that we need to. It's fairly practical, and I think that's something that we have to master, or we're not going to survive.
Practical and intuitive if you grow up in it. And I also know that it is radically cosmological if you don't, right? I think I learned this kind of, bridging two worlds. I come from a mixed family, and I was working in the environmental movement for a while, and I kept running into this like lack of understanding. I was trying to understand my authors, and they were saying, essentially, humans are essentially destructive.
Mm-hmm.
Essentially, need to remove them from the land for the health of the land. And it took me years to get my head around what they were saying, and finally, I realized that this is a worldview, right?
Mm-hmm.
There is a worldview in which human beings are separate from other living things and the land. And in that separation, all sorts of discord starts inside. And I found it so tremendously sad. I remember realizing that the folks I were talking to felt this. They felt that their very presence on this world was consumptive and destructive. And that the pain of that was so it really struck me, and I felt really grateful to have been sort of raised with a different maybe better but different, right? Everyone has their own ways, way in which when we teach my daughter how to pick, like we go out picking herbs for tea or mushrooms or berries. We teach her to talk to the plants and introduce herself, tell them who she is, tell them what her intentions are, right? But also we teach her how to pick it in a way that makes the plant clear, right? All the little plants that if you pick them right before the leaves, they'll bifurcate and they'll get, all those things. And you see like this intense joy it brings her, this idea that she's not just taking something, but that she's taking something and giving something back. She gives the plant a present in how she does it, and the plant gives her a present and their friends. And I, just my very long way of saying, I think that that's the essential thing that you're saying, that a future in which we relearn, if that's not something that you got family or share or get to or get to be in together, this idea of human beings as beneficial when we're playing our right role in nature.
And, you know, I was always taught that, so one of the things, just like you say, when you're going out and gathering, you know, you always say thanks, and you always leave gifts, and it's a really joyful time. You know, really, some of my favorite times growing up, when I was a kid, was going out in the woods with the family, basically, just like you're talking about with your daughter. And I'm so glad to hear you're doing that with her. And you don't understand it when you're young, really. It's kind of only as I got older did I realize that there was a lot of learning. You know, I just looked at it as fun time with family. You know, we're going out and gathering seaweed. We're going out and gathering baynuts. You know, um, but it helps you feel at home and be a part of this whole community that's around you, and build relationships with it, and start to understand it and know it, and to find joy in that kind of partnership and knowing. And we were always told when we gathered basket materials that you tell the plants that you're going to be making something beautiful out of them, that they're going to live on, and they're going to be a beautiful, useful thing. And then it makes plants happy to know that. And so it's that kind of relationship, and that relationship continues as you leave that basket and gift the basket, use the basket. You know, it's an idea that the world would be sad to lose humans. You know, the relationship that we're supposed to be in is one that's precious on both sides. And so there's a great book that a woman named Kat Anderson wrote called Tending the Wild, which I would totally recommend to people to read. But she talks about this this kind of disconnect where native California, because it has been lived among and managed, you know, people have the actual plants in California many of them have grown up to sort of need human intervention, depend on human intervention, humans digging them, humans burning them, humans sort of harvesting from them to actually be healthy. And so this, when National Park Service rules and governmental regulations sort of forbid you to, you know, that take only pictures, sort of rule in parks, they couldn't understand why, you know, some plants just kept dwindling away. And because they kept dwindling away, and because they became more rare, it became even more important to protect them and keep humans from them. And meanwhile, native elders are saying, you don't understand, those plants need us. You know, we need to gather from them. We need to be harvesting them. We need to take care of them, or you're going to lose them. So it's that kind of interesting and I think different way of looking at the world, has some real life consequences.
Yeah, I think about Ron Good, the Mono elder, who's so he has so much knowledge about burning and fire. And I remember being a teenager and meeting Ron, and we were California was in a drought, at the time, and he just sort of offhandedly saying, and my, this is probably my first drought as like a young, I really like recognized, and I remember I was living in the Owens Valley on the eastern side of California, right, which is a place that's been stripped of its water. So there's a real active relationship with water there, and everyone was saying, "That's time to cut all the aspen trees down." I was like, like what?
Sacrilege, right?
like, well, I mean, honey, it's not the first time we've had a drought. Like we've been here thousands, like time immemorial. There have been droughts. Let the aspen trees grow up in the wet years. They suck up all the water. In the dry years, you cut them down. They release all the water and the streams run. He's like, that's our relationship with them.
Right.
Like, that's what we do together, and then that makes space for them to grow again. Like, huge. And I remember talking to him years later about climate change, and him saying, "Yeah, it's different this time, but this is not the first time we've been here in the climate." I really knowing those stories, right, that go back, and he was like, there have been major climate shifts, like they caused from different things, but it's happened, and we've adapted to it, and we know ways, and the ways that we don't know, we learn, because we learn the land, because we're in that close relationship with it, and and the thing that was really, that I feel like is just really sort of beautiful in that matter of factness of having that knowledge that spans such a large amount of time, but also having that value of like what we don't know we learn, is that there's no out for the future, right? Like we're living in a time where there's a kind of, I don't know, apocalyptic undertone sometimes in the media, as though this all gets to end, or we get to end, or we all just get to abdicate our responsibility to this. It's so antithetical to that viewpoint of like, we've done this for millennia, we're going to do this for millennia, we're going to do this, like our relationship to each other and to the land is forever. You figure it out. There's no, that's it, I'm just giving up. That's just not, it's not an option. The option is always figure it out. I feel like when you're in that loving relationship with the land, and you have that responsibility, it's a very nurturing place, but it's also a very clear place. There's not a lot of hand wringing of like, what do we do now? It's like, figure it out. That's what you do now, in a very practical way that I find really, I find comforting when approaching the future.
Well, it certainly gives you, it gives you a direction. So you're not spending time flailing around. It's just, okay, how do we go to work on this? But there's never any doubt that you'll go to work on this. and that you have that responsibility. And I think that's, we were talking a little bit earlier about stories, and how stories were such a way of learning. And I don't know, often when we heard the stories was, when we're out on the land. But in terms of you were saying you weren't necessarily comfortable with telling other people's stories about, the place that you live right now. There's wonderful stories. But you were saying, from Native people there, and you were saying you didn't necessarily feel comfortable telling those stories. But I think we're going to have to, kind of teach those stories and I mean, I'm getting older, so I think you talked about how your life changed when your daughter was born. You know, I think one of the things that has changed my life recently is realizing I'm sort of stepping into the role of you know, my parents and my grandparents. You know, the older generation that I grew up with is virtually gone, and so where I used to be the learner, now I have to, you know, sort of pass on, you know, really a responsibility to pass on what some of they've told me is. And I've been thinking that it's really a responsibility that isn't just to people in my family, but it's also to my community here, because and that's what some of my work was about. But it's because there's not enough of us left in some ways to be able to do the job. And you have to really nurture that whole mindset and people around you so that you can sort of help give people some of the tools that they're going to need um, to do the work. And I don't know how that resonates with you.
I'm fascinated by this. I think to me this is maybe a moment of adaptation and change, like we were talking about. You know, I think I had a kind of traditional um, teaching that people owned their stories, they owned their songs. You don't sing the songs of other people
Right.
at a certain time and moment and in front of certain people, and also, you know, stories. And I think, you know, part of that was traditional. I think part of that was also a reaction to cultural appropriation.
Yep. Absolutely.
Sort of things being taken and misused, and the hurt of that. And I'm really, as a learner, I'm really interested to hear more about because I know that Joanne had mentioned that you had shared with her a kind of, she was asking about managing the land, I'm paraphrasing, but that you had sort of said, like, it's a gift to the people here if you manage it, like manage it.
Right.
Manage it. But that, you know, having people who have come here who are not from here in an indigenous way, like what's the step, right? Like now we adapt to that. Now that's the reality of where we are, is that we're all there's all sorts of people who live here in California, and what's that right relationship between people who have moved here with the knowledge that's come from here.
Yeah, and you know, some of it is the time we live in, Lindsay. You know, it's sort of an all hands on deck time. And you look at California, and it has been such a fundamental change, you know, in the landscape. You know, it's been engineered. You know, water has been sent over mountains to the desert. You know, taken from the north and sent to the south. You know, lakes have been Clear Lake, you know, which is one of the big kind of big places in the Pomo world. You know, the shoreline has been changed dramatically with people doing all sorts of things to it, but you know, all the engineering of filling the lake edges, San Francisco Bay, you know, the Delta, all that's happened, all this influx of new invasive species that are everywhere. You know, so much has happened, and it's had such a big impact in a short amount of time. And we've lost so much life here. I've just seen that in my lifetime. You know, all these. There's so much fewer birds for example. So many fewer animals. And, that's just my very short tenure here since I was a child. But, I think it's going to take all of us to sort of, you have to, I think one of the great things that I really came to believe is you have to know the land around you and um, and build a relationship with that and with it and that building a relationship involves this kind of, just like any human relationship, part of it is just learning the other person and starting to understand them and appreciate them and focus, see what they give you, what you can give, them. And it's a really enjoyable process. I mean, I think some of the most satisfying things in my life have been very simple things. It's not, winning a prize or, some great kind of individual achievement. Really, the most satisfying things in my life have often been just, going out with family and going to the ocean, just sitting under an oak tree. It just really moments of joy, just appreciating the beauty of what's around us. I don't know if that's been your experience.
I remember coming to visit you at the Grace Hudson Museum years ago. I was driving through and you were making manzanita cider for your daughter's birthday. And I remember the tremendous joy on your face because you knew she wanted it and she loved it and she this was such this beautiful gift and you were making it, I think in the museum fridge to take to her and you brought us back and let us have a taste. And I just remember sort of vicariously, yes, it has been my experience that being sort of simple things and being out on the land and feeling that connection. But I think also seeing it in another person, right? You were getting to share with her something that was simple and essential and nourishing, and there was shared joy in that. And I just remember thinking what an amazing gift to give a kid. Not only that you know her and you know that this is what she wants, but that it's being made for her with such sort of abundant joy of giving. And I think about that when I think about this idea of the kind of joy of responsibility that and the way in which we sometimes it's easier to learn that from plants than from people. People can be complicated.
Always.
Learning how to pick from a plant or be on the land or make it happy and seeing that reflected back, right? Seeing, I don't know, birds eating the seeds you put out or hummingbirds. There's hummingbirds outside my window right now and they're going crazy on this plant that is planted, or getting to see that shared joy and to start to feel that love, to feel that the natural world loves you specifically, in the way that it loves every other living thing, and none of us is so special as to not be loved, right? None of us is so unique and so individual and so different as to not be loved by the world. That's just untrue. But that when you start to feel that from the natural world, I think it helps us feel that from other people. It helps kind of open up that capacity to feel loved. But I think it also opens up this tremendous joy in responsibility, in the doing for others, and that exchange, right? That give and take of care, that flow of things. It's it's beautiful to feel, and it's beautiful to see in other people. And it's so simple. You know, it takes a little knowing, like you said. It takes learning. That's one of our our Cherokee values that I really I feel like I'm going to spend a lifetime trying to understand, is that for us, learning is a spiritual value. It's not just pragmatic. It's part of our job as people.
Right.
It's just learning about the world, being in it. That's it's how we know how to love it better.
Right. I think, you know, that's one of the human gifts is, you know, our brains and our powers of observation, and we're supposed to use it. Use the power for good. But it's also really quite satisfying, I think. You know, solving puzzles, you know, certainly, you know, I think over the years when I've figured out something, that kind of aha moment is one of life's rewards. It is really satisfying, and it, you know, and then you build on that. But it's, I think, humans gift. And, instead of wasting it, we should, you know, kind of use it for good.
And I feel like it's such an antidote to like greed and desire and that cycle of wanting and needing. And this is, I don't know if this is a psychological theory. It's based in not a deep understanding of psychology. Maybe it's an observation about other people and myself, is that so I work now in philanthropy, branch of finance, and that's a different thing for me. I work with money, and so I get to see how people interact with what they think of as wealth, or how they define it, and I've been wondering if the need for power and wealth, that desire, the thing that you know, that sort of gnaws at you, the kind of desire, or even a desire for a specific outcome in the future, a kind of just gnawing desire, I wonder if it's a misplaced need for connection.
Mm-hmm.
You feel that connection to the natural world, to other people, you get that sort of burst of warmth inside. And in some ways, when you feel power or acquisition or wealth, you get a similar burst. It's not sustained, it's not long, it sort of eats at you instead of feeds you. But there is kind of a burst of heat that you get from that, you know, a kind of rush. And I've been wondering lately if the desire for that rush is really just simply a lack of accessing that kind of steady stream of warmth that reciprocity gives. It's that you're only getting half the rush. You never get to sort of give it back and sustain it and feel the deep connection. And part of our work is working with people at the end of their lives who have amassed wealth and then don't know what to do with it. They're not connected to other people, and they're trying to figure out where to connect with it. And I've noticed that there's this healing power of connection, of sort of telling your story and getting to connect and getting to feel like you give back, and that somehow heals a kind of loneliness that I think manifests in a lot of ways.
That's that loneliness. That's a very good, I think, capturing of that feeling. And we're not made to be alone. You know, I think that's the ironic thing is there's so much all around us that's alive that we're supposed to be part of. that we are, we're in a sense surrounded by all this wealth that we never know is out there, or all this joy that we've never participated in, and go looking for it places that don't provide it. So, and it's just so the first, when I worked as director of the museum, it's really kind of the first time I was around anybody with a lot of money, and it was always so interesting because very few of those people were happy, I would say. And some of the happiest people I ever knew were my grandparents. My dad's parents were side of the family that came from Sonoma County, and quite poor. Came from really hard life stories. They've had a lot of hard things happen to them, and they were always, there was always struggles in various ways. But some of the happiest people I knew, some of the most generous, some of the most gracious, and it certainly didn't matter to them in terms of their happiness, that they had virtually nothing. They enjoyed just so many of just life. So much of the beauty around them, the world around them, the people around them. Going fishing, all those stories of all those memories of just being together, being outside, and learning. Those are really happy times, and virtually free. So yeah, I think our society has certainly not done us any favors in terms of kind of telling us we need all these things to be happy. And it's a great sense of freedom when you find out you don't.
Also a great.
I would like to just take a pause. There has been so much to take in this, and just want to take maybe 2 breaths to appreciate and kind of catch up to where you're taking us. So we're going to sound 1 bell, and then when you feel ready, you just hop right back in.
As you can tell, Sherrie and I could talk to each other for quite a long.
I was going to say, Lindsay, one of the things I was just thinking as we were talking, one of the things that has been interesting about this year has been, I think it's thrown a lot of people back into rediscovering simple things that give pleasure and that we all still can enjoy. So I know that being able to go outside and just, still be part of the world here. And it's been so comforting to see, spring happening, summer happening, all the changes that all that sort of way that you mark the world cycling through has kept on going, and still able to be part of it. And it's been very, and relationships that you've been able to continue, human and other. It's just been so comforting to have that. And I think that is one of the gifts of this year, is kind of stripping away a lot of the extraneous busyness and things that we sort of find ourselves sort of swimming in this current. And we've all sort of been spit out on various sort of isolated shores. And some of that has been good to see what kind of really is important and what perhaps is not.
In my husband's tradition, there's a medicine person,
Mm-hmm.
and we get to see him when we go back to Wyoming or South Dakota once or twice a year. And by this magic of internet, we can talk to him more, and so we get to talk to him about this moment, which has been really a real gift. And we believe, and it's this is our way. Everyone has their own way, but in our way, people's job is to balance the earth, and tell you when it's out of balance, and it will tell you how to balance it. And which, talk about a healthy relationship. Like the earth can tell you what it needs. And so, in our understanding of pandemics, because this is also not the first pandemic that we've been through, it is an imbalance. There's an imbalance in the world. And one of the things that he was saying is, the earth is telling you to come back, spend some time, like take a walk. And if that earth says it needs to get back to balance, to do what you need to know, to be the people you need to be, to make this balanced, then there's your gift. Like, you were given this lesson. And not to make it rosy or light, lessons often come with a lot of suffering. Imbalance comes with a lot of things. And that's real. Those lessons aren't to be taken lightly, right? They come back. that's the other thing about our belief system, is like, if you don't learn the lesson this time, don't worry, it will be reiterated in a more fervent manner next time. There's always that part of nature. And so, in our teaching, that's been part of this lesson. He was like, just stay home. Like, stay home, see what's there, grow a garden, put your feet in the dirt. And that's what we're gonna find our way. And I feel really grateful for the lesson. It's easy to get lost. We have another thing to sort of share with you. Sherrie has brought one of her traditional stories to share and talk about, but maybe before we do that, does anyone else have any thoughts or reflections or
questions? Yeah.
questions? I don't know what your protocol is for talking, so if you have one, we'll go with it, or if not, you can just unmute yourself and we'll give you a minute of quiet to think.
It looks like Corinne is raising her hand.
Hi, thank you so much for sharing this conversation with us. And one of the things that I found this year was a great desire to connect with trees and to learn from them and to have them as teachers and to communicate with them, to listen to them, to learn their wisdom. Do you have anything to share about that?
You want to start, Sherrie?
Oh, why don't you go ahead, Lindsay?
Something that I think is fun. This is a fun game that we play at our house, which is called Science Catches Up, in which Western science and there's this big breakthrough, right? And we have and very good natured. I feel like it's a very loving laugh with Native folks who have had that in their traditions for a long time, going, welcome Western science to the party. Like, welcome our knowledge is like our own ways. No one's gonna, rob somebody of that journey. And in that way, I think there's ways that we can learn from plants directly, but we can also learn from the greater body of human knowledge about them to understand them more. And one of those fun discoveries in the last couple of years, right, was that trees communicate with one another, and that they have this deep relationship with fungi beneath them and the mycelium, and so they're kind of in relation. They're not solitary beings in any way, and they also that they migrate. Here in the redwoods, one of the really interesting things is it turns out that redwoods and sequoias are very adaptable to climate change. They're reaching out, they're migrating past their usual points. They're finding new places to be. The trees in Joshua Tree, this I find so funny. So Joshua Tree National Monument is losing its Joshua trees because the trees are moving ever so slightly, they're sort of dying off in one area and blooming up in another, into more suitable climates, right? There's other places around them that are more or less suitable, and there's this funny sort of man-made conundrum that I just get no end of joy from, of like, what happens if the monument loses its trees? It's like, they're taking a walk. What we learn is like, take a walk with them, change what you think of as a park. I don't know. So I guess for me, there are so many ways to learn from trees, right? There's the observation of them, there's the being of them, but there's also the, learning from weavers. There are things that I've learned about spruce roots from tagging along with weavers that, 10,000 years of observation to figure out. And I feel like, all of those different kinds and ways of knowledge have their own value and will resonate with each of us in our.
And it might be a good segue into the story. So one of the things about trees in this part of the country is so many of those trees are oaks. Those are I would say probably the tree that's the most, and again, science has caught up with this, or explains it perhaps in a different way. But woodlands and oak trees are the type of tree here in California that promotes the most diversity, that provides the most, kind of food and shelter and just conditions to encourage life and diversity of life than any other tree and type of woodland. So really cherish your oak trees. And of course, for people, that's also true. Oaks provide food And there's just tons you could say about the oak trees, but they, one of the things you can say about oak trees is, again, just sort of talking about this cycle of human interaction with kind of beings around you. So the oak trees provide food, and the food, one of the things you're taught when you're growing up here is that one of the things that's important to do is oak trees kind of shed their oaks in bunches, I guess I'd say. So we have what we call first drop, which is kind of the first acorns that kind of fall from the tree. And those are the ones that you usually don't pick, and you save, I was always told you save those for all the other beings that need those acorns. And also you learn that those generally are the acorns that often are the kind of most spotty in terms of good acorns and bad acorns for eating. So there's sort of a practical reason and a more kind of a more generous reason for doing first, letting first drop go. But so you're not just looking at that as food for you. And part of what you often do is there's a lot of reasons that you want to burn with oaks. I mean, we haven't even got into fire and the role that fire plays in California, natural California. But one of the things you do is you burn kind of underneath the oaks, and it does a lot of different things. But one of the things it does is there's a little beetle-y guy, sort of, it's called a weevil, and it's like a little flying beetle with a long nose. They're actually kind of cute when you look at pictures of them. And it lives under the ground in an oak tree, and then it hatches out and it flies up into the oak kind of in the spring, and it takes its nose and it sort of makes a hole in the sort of forming shell of the acorn in the oak and deposits an egg. And then it hatches that egg into kind of this wormy looking thing. And it's like James and the Giant Peach. It has all of this food. Its home is just filled with the food that it loves, and it just eats. It just spends all this time growing and eating in the acorn. And then there's this big thump, and in the fall it falls to the ground, and there's this tremendous impact in that acorn, and it signals the little wormy guy to start chewing its way outside. It has to chew through the hole, and it squeezes out, and it's really fun to watch, actually. If you ever have a chance, see this little white thing come up, squeeze through the hole and pop out, and it starts crawling on the ground, and it goes down into the ground, and it pupates through several stages, and then it becomes that beetle and flies up into the tree again. So that's kind of the cycle. And if you let that go on for too long, again, the tree gets infected. It becomes unhealthy. And in terms of how people come into this, if you pick up one of those acorns that has a little hole in the shell, open it up, and you'll see that it is just disgusting inside, because really all that's left in there for the most part is the worm poop, which nobody wants to eat. And so that's one of the things when you're gathering acorn, you're always sorting and getting rid of those. So fire, what you end up finding out, one of the main things fire does, if you burn under the trees, you're making the stage of the, I don't know the scientific word, but the stage of the insect that's kind of in that that litter under the tree and right in the ground under the tree, essentially it gets rid of them. And the tree becomes much more healthier, and people have much better acorn, much cleaner acorn. So it's this kind of rewarding cycle of virtue in a sense. There's lots and lots of things like that that you can learn from trees. How people figure that out, I don't know, but it's trees are very good company, especially oak trees. And I'm very glad to hear you're spending time with them.
I have a friend who was out gathering acorns and she comfort crop in a new place. Oh, did you find somewhere remote? And she was like, she got this sort of sly look, and I was like, oh no, what did you do? And she was like, you go in the suburbs of the city.
Yeah.
All the smoke from the fireplaces is replicating the cleansing smoke from, and they get rid of the, like litter in the trees. And she was like, oh, much better cared for, because the trees that you leave alone, those are getting really sick. Actually, they're getting fungus and stuff. And she said, but you have to imagine what it looks like to people in the suburbs to have someone on the back of the truck shaking an oak tree getting all the acorns out. But I thought it was one of those grateful times of like, they really need us, even if they have to live in the suburbs to do it. Does anyone else have any reflections before we share the story?
This is Vivian. I'm curious about the wall hanging behind you, Lindsay. The center appears to have a negative right beside it, or an image that is reversed. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So I was wondering, is there a meaning to the artwork behind you?
There is actually. Because I have a 3-year-old daughter who is wonderful and curious and completely intolerant of the idea that I would spend an hour and a half at home talking with all of you. I have broken into my office building. It's really empty. And this behind me is belongs to the Native Cultures Fund where I work. And this is a Brian Tripp piece. He's a Karuk artist. From up here, he's an amazing contemporary artist and singer. And I'll move this chair so you can see it. And it says, if what I know is true, then why doesn't it seem to have any effect on you? It don't add up. And this is his, he's of upriver people. And these are different basket images. Mm-hmm. This is the morning star. This is up into their high country, their holy place. And so this is his sort of meditation on knowledge and being in your home place. This is my rudimentary understanding, but I'm very happy to get to be here and talk to this piece of artwork again, because this is my daily companion here at work. Sherrie knows Brian probably. Thank you for asking.
Hi,
I was going to say,
thank you. I was going to have a quick question. I know Sherrie mentioned this, and I know you show many things to the naturalist class in Hopkins before, the Hoplands, the naturalist class. But I'm really curious because as we have the influx of many non-native species, like invasive, but then it's kind of, the ecosystem is really changing in some way. And I wonder if there's an adaptation and kind of changing with that too. Things that are not here 10,000 years ago are here, and having maybe find its own niche in the system in some way, while at the same time wreaking havoc on other species around it. So yeah, I'm just kind of curious about the co-evolutions of the plants, the natural worlds, and then the humans aspect of it co-evolving as well.
Well, I would say so one of the more interesting examples of this is in the grasses. So I think in California, almost 90% of the grass that you see growing in the hills that looks like it's in wildland is actually all invasive. It's not native. It came over with kind of the Mexicans and the Spanish from Europe, and the English, American settlers coming in, and there tend to be plants that are people know the difference between annuals and perennials. So annuals, the plant grows in a year and dies, and a new plant then grows up next year. Perennials, the plant continues to live. So what you have in the hills right now are the annuals that essentially outcompeted these perennial kind of bunch grasses that we used to have, which are much better adapted. I mean, much better adapted to our conditions in a way. Once you get them established, they tend to have these very long, extensive root systems that go way down into the ground and continue to grow. So much better carbon sequestration. They kind of going down to find the water. And so they're able to survive through the summer, the hot, dry spells because of that ability. And so they actually don't burn nearly as easily. They tend to hold the ground. So we have here in the kind of the foothills, a lot of ground that slides and it causes problems. And look at Santa Barbara. So, it also, things are much more stable, and it's not solid. So the kind of annual grasses, they just all are single stems and they just pack in a place. Where the perennials, they have, you have one bunch grass, and it kind of has a little bit of a fan of leaves around it, a skirt of leaves, and then you'll have another one, but there's space in between those, just a different kind of growing pattern on the land, which means that space then gives room for a lot of the wildflowers and bulbs, the bulb flowers to grow up, which were, kind of food, but also when they talk about the wildflowers of California, the fields and fields of flowers. It's one of the reasons you don't see them often the way that you did is there's just literally no space in the ground for those flowers the way there used to be. So there's kind of a lot of reasons. And it's much better food for animals, sort of nutritionally. So there's kind of a lot of reasons where it'd be nice and healthy to go back to those grasslands. I don't know that we ever will be able to totally, but I think there's some value in sort of teaching people about them and how it sort of all works together and trying to discourage some of those other grasses. So I don't know where that, it's all like a big puzzle piece, and a big puzzle, and some of those pieces are sort of foundational pieces. So that's where I kind of have problems with just, my tendency is just to want to take them out. So I don't know, Lindsay, if you have something to say to that.
When I was a child, we were taught because we grew up outside of our tribal area, right? Our tribal area is now Oklahoma, and it was the Southeast before we were moved. But we grew up as relocation people out here in California. And so one of the big lessons was you can be a guest or you can be a colonizer, and it's your choice. And it was this was a very strict lesson in our household, in our community, that not being in your own homeland is fine. It's a state of being that has happened for a very long time. And what we do with that is what matters. There's this historical narrative in California that happens a lot that colonization was inevitable. Two civilizations come together and one has to dominate. It's a very normal way that history is taught here. And it's actually not true. You know, there was all sorts of contact in California, Polynesian contact, Russian contact, that didn't result in colonization, that resulted in, you know, trade relationships or intermarriage or, you know, other sorts of things. And we were sort of taught the same was true with plants, which it's not necessarily bad. There was no good and bad. There was no moral value put to plants that are new versus plants that were here before. But we were taught a lot about plants that were good family and plants that had not yet learned how to be good family. And so the sort of grasses that that Sherrie is talking about are here. Up here we have Scotch broom, this big plant, gorgeous yellow flowers, and will just take up all the space and take up all the water and just is not a good friend. It's like a really bad friend. And yet they're still plants, they're living things, they're still our family. We're not angry at them. Like I don't hate them or curse at them and I take it out. But I still talk to them and I still take it out because they're not being good guests and they're not being good family. And I can take, you know, I think in the same way that sometimes family are not being good guests. And you don't just like murder them, right? But you can nicely say like, maybe not here, like maybe not right now. And I feel like that's, you know, then there are other plants. We grow chamomile in our yard and my daughter loves making chamomile tea. Chamomile is not native to here. But it's a plant that, you know, it respects other plants. It's not trying to take over anything, and we appreciate it, and we appreciate the folks who brought it, and we take responsibility that we asked it to be a guest, so that if it started taking over the fields around us, that would also be our job to ask it nicely, to, you know, have some better boundaries. And so I guess the way we were taught, it's not a people who are in their ancestral homelands have a sacred and special place in the world. They're carriers of the kind of oldest and deepest teachings of a place, and it's wonderful. And we were taught that it's our relationship as people who have moved around to learn, you know, to come to learn, to come to learn about the languages and the cultures and the land. And that we're not less than because we don't have that, but we're honored with the opportunity if people will teach us and let us learn as kind of younger siblings on the land, right? I'm a much younger sister on this place. You know, and kind of like a toddler, like I mess up more and I don't understand as much, and you know, it would take my family a lot longer to have that deep knowledge, but it's a joy to get. And I think about that with people too, you know, people who have come to a place and said, this is our place now, this is not your place, we're gonna kill your people, we're gonna take your stuff, you're gonna speak our language. Like that's a choice. And there are other choices that people have made in history to come and say, you know, you do it this way, we do it that way. Let's learn from each other. Which is something, you know, that being a guest in California for a large part of my life, I really admire about the Native people here. It's something that I think is really amazing. You know, 178 different tribes that are still active in California, and even more that are federally unrecognized. There are over 60 languages that are spoken here, indigenous languages still spoken today, or that have been sort of reawakened. It's one of, indigenously, it's one of the most culturally diverse places. I think a lot of people know that, like, biologically, it's one of the most biologically diverse places in the world, but I think it's second only to Malaysia in sort of the density of different cultures. And we're talking different religions, different centers of the world, you know, different languages, all of these different things packed into this area. And what's kind of amazing is it wasn't holy war, right? You don't have, you know, the history of the deep history of California, like there are fights, you know, human people. But it's not this constant kind of domination and holy war. And you could have stories of, like, elder folks who spoke 5 or 6 languages, and a lot of protocols of what happens if you married out of your tribe. And, you know, that being in relationship, not just with the land, but with other people who are different from you, and what it means when you walk onto their, you know, their area and land, and how to be respectful, is such a deep teaching here. And I feel like that's something that even being good neighbors is such a gift that Native Californians share with the rest of us. There's sort of there's a whole template here for how to be a new species, but not an invasive species.
This is Nick. This is kind of in line with what Lindsay was saying in the beginning, but could you comment on the quote by Wordsworth that says, "The world is too much with us"?
Should I take this one, Sherrie, or do you want to?
Sure, go for it, start.
This is a fun imagination exercise, because Wordsworth comes from a very different tradition and a very different worldview than I do. So I can interpret it through my culture and upbringing, but I'm almost entirely sure this is not what he meant. Apologies to Wordsworth for.
I would agree with that, Lindsay, and I would say that I would tend to think my counterpoint to that would be, I would think the world is not enough with us. And it's just all in how you define the world.
Yeah, that's, I think the thing that it's funny to me is the world with us. There isn't a world without us. We're apart. We're not two separate things with each other or without each other. We are in the world, and it is us. We're made up of each other. And, you know, I can see interpreting it in a way that the capacity for love and joy is something that's grown, right? You can feel it stretching in your soul. Like you can feel when your spirit is stretched to love more or feel more joy than you knew. I think often we cry in those moments because we're just, you know, we're sort of being broken open to the world. And so if, you know, if there is ever a feeling that there is more joy in the world or more suffering in the world or more love in the world than we can handle, I think there's an internal state of growth and that pain as we sort of stretch to accommodate you know, the totality of the world as we experience it. And so I can see it as an emotional state, but as a relational state. Something that I learned from Sherrie's aunt is actually the world is enough for all. That the essence of the world and our relationship to it is that it's exactly enough for all.
Wow. Thank you so much. And I'm wondering if each of you has some parting thoughts that you would like to wind up with. This hour and a half just went lickety split, way way more rich than I could have imagined. So I turn it back to you for another few minutes.
I'm going to share if I can do this, but I cannot because computers are what they are. Joanne can share, or Sherrie can. We had a story.
I allowed you to have sharing privileges, Lindsay, so you should be able to share now.
Let me, just trying to put it into the chat, and for whatever reason. Well, maybe we'll leave you with the story since this time has gone so much faster. What do you think, Sherrie?
Sure, sounds good.
Thank you, Melanie.
I saw it in the chat. I think you did it.
I think Melanie did it for me because what a wonderful gift.
So I can just tell you a little bit about this story. It's from a man along the coast, Bill James. And I'm not a Buddhist, but I know that in Buddhist tradition, there's a lot of learning that happens with stories. And Lindsay was confirming that. And I would say in Native California, there's a lot of learning with stories and thinking about them. So I just picked a simple story. It's something that I do with school kids and that are learning about scientifically, kind of studying about oak woodlands and kind of what are some of the animals, what are some of the science of it all. And this is a way to kind of help them think about what seem to be simple stories and all the different kind of levels that you can learn at through the story. So it's got some really good biological information in it. It's got some good sort of cultural information in it. It's got some good, I would say, metaphysical information in it. And so we thought it might be fun for you to try it too and see what answers you come up with. So, and really kind of centering in it of this view of it's good for us to get to know, kind of the Native California around us. So you want to add to that, Lindsay?
Just thank you for sharing a story. That's a huge gift. Sharing it with me and everyone, and thank you all for spending this time with us and for all of the work I know you are doing in your own mindfulness and your own practice to be whatever the future is. It's very nice to be it with you.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, we very much appreciate your willingness to share and your recognition that perhaps the time is different, that rather than cultural appropriation, these stories are now our responsibility to receive and to do with in a wholesome way. It's very touching to see the interbeing nature in that very practical and spiritual sense woven so tightly together. Sometimes we don't have the roadmap that indigenous people have, the culture, tradition handed down for so many hundreds, I don't know, thousands of generations. And helping us relearn our beneficial place in the web of life, that we are part of it, and we need to embrace it in a way that really maintains life. So thank you from all the people here, and as well as all of the relations of the earth that we have. We end with 3 bells and bowing in gratitude to your generous sharing. And it's our tradition that on the next bell we'll stand. If we care to. And the next bell to bow to each other in gratitude for the support and the interbeing nature of our relationships with each other in the Sangha. And one final bell, that the benefits of our being together should radiate out in all 10 directions and bring peace, harmony, joy, liberation to all life, all creation.
Oh.
Oh. Thank you. Thank you. It was, we are recording this so we can watch it over and over and over again. And perhaps you would like the recording. Well, there was a lot of, and the synergy was really great. Really. Thank you.
Very happy to be with you all.
Thank you for bringing us together.
Yeah.
Thank you for bringing us together.